The history of American Indians rests uneasily in the context of United States history. Americans are aware of the poor treatment of natives during the founding of the United States. American history classes across the nation teach events such as the Trail of Tears and explain how the United States took land away from natives time and time again. However, most classes view all these injustices as actions of the past. Unfortunately, injustice continues every day for American Indians, but Americans have just stopped drawing attention to it.
Redskin.
Derogatory. It's just extremely offensive in so many ways, and I don't need to explain that.
Outdated.
Racist.
I find that word offensive.
A racist name to a football team.
I find it offensive, really bad, that it's a team. There's not a team called Blacks or Crackers or anything like that.
Gross. When there were bounty hunters looking for natives, it originated from not even saying, like, wanted dead or alive. Like, you could just bring redskins back for payment.
Profiling. That's just like calling us the N-word.
It is just as offensive as the N-word would be, or any other nasty, discouraging word that we will say about any group of people.
The American Indian Movement, or AIM, was a Native American advocacy group formally founded in July of 1968. The movement existed for 500 years prior without a formal name. The main purpose of this movement was to protect the rights of Native Americans, which had been crushed by European immigrants since their arrival. When the group was founded in Minneapolis, its original goal was to help Indians in urban ghettos who had been displaced by government programs that had forced them from the reservations. Its goal eventually encompassed the entire spectrum of Indian demands: economic independence, revitalization of traditional culture, protection of legal rights, and most especially, autonomy over tribal areas and the restoration of lands that they had believed had been illegally seized.
I was sitting in prison, looking at this whole movement, the civil rights and the anti-war movement passing us by. And I wanted to get out so bad to be part of this movement that was going on. There was a new feeling out there of a different kind of patriotism to human rights, patriotism to life instead of death. I wanted to be part of it.
Two prominent leaders of the American Indian movement were Dennis Banks and Richard Oakes. While Banks' protests won some government concessions, drew national attention, and wide sympathy for the poor social and economic conditions of American Indians, he achieved few real improvements in the daily lives of millions of Native Americans. Many lived on poor reservations and in urban ghettos. They continued to fall behind other citizens in jobs, housing, and education. Richard Oakes is best known for his leadership during the occupation of Alcatraz, which led to multiple acts being passed in favor of the Native Americans. Unfortunately, he was killed in 1972 by a security guard. San Francisco State University dedicated the Richard Oakes Multicultural Center to him, since he devoted his life to prompting the idea that Native Americans are in control of their own destiny.
The occupation of Alcatraz by over 5,600 American Indians lasted from November 20th, 1969 to June 11th, 1971. In the first attempt to take over the island on March 18th, 1964, a group of Sioux were escorted off the island after claiming that Fort Lamar Treaty of 1868 guaranteed them any surplus federal land. The proposed idea was to turn Alcatraz into a new Indian center after the one in San Francisco burned down. In the second attempt, nearly 100 Indians arrived on the island on November 9th and made an offer to the government. 14 of the activists made it to the island, spent the night, then were removed the following day. In the final attempt on November 20th, 89 Native Americans and a group of 78 Indians of all tribes landed on the island early in the morning. Indians of all tribes started a precedent for natives standing up for their illegally taken land and got attention due to their mix of radicalism and traditionalism. We moved onto Alcatraz Island because we feel that Indian people need a cultural center of their own. For several decades, Indian people have not had enough control of training their young people. And without a cultural center of their own, we are afraid that the old Indian way may be lost. We believe that the only way to keep them alive is for Indian people to do it themselves. Letter from Indians of all tribes, December 16, 1969. Once on the island, they were offered the warden's residence and took over immediately. A proclamation was delivered by Richard Oakes.
Why Alcatraz? Everybody can see it. On one end of the country, you have the Statue of Liberty. On this, it's just the opposite. We have a true reality of liberty. We, the Native Americans, reclaimed this land known as Alcatraz Island in the name of all American Indians by right of discovery. We wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with the Caucasian inhabitants of this land, and hereby offer the following treaty. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. We know that $24 in trade goods for these 16 acres is more than was paid when Manhattan Island was sold, but we know that land values have risen over the years. We will further guide the inhabitants in the proper way of living. We will offer them our religion, our education, our life ways, in order to help them achieve our level of civilization and thus raise them and all their white brothers up from their savage and unhappy state. Since the San Francisco Indian Center burned down, there is no place for Indians to assemble and carry on our tribal life here in the white man's city. Therefore, we plan to develop on this island several Indian institutes. In the name of all Indians, therefore, we reclaim this land for our Indian nations. Signed, Indians of all tribes, November 1969, San Francisco, California.
An elected council was formed, and over the next several months, thousands of Indians joined the island. Their slogan became, "We hold the rock." Their declaration was that they refused to leave the island until it was recognized as Native American property. Once their occupation was secure, the IATs broadcast their concerns on a pirate radio station. A Sioux, John Trudell, was the voice of Radio Free Alcatraz. The island received supplies and money from more than just the general public, but from politicians, movie stars, and rock bands. Celebrities such as Marlon Brando, Anthony Quinn, and Jane Fonda visited the island. President Richard M. Nixon was sympathetic to the cause and focused on keeping communications with the occupiers. There were several meetings with government officials, but the demands were never met. The occupation became dangerous and resulted in the death of a 13-year-old girl. Yvonne fell to her death from a balcony on one of the island's buildings, prompting the Oaks to leave. This was part of a combination of chaos, vandalism, disorganization, and physical danger that took place on Alcatraz. The occupation ended after a fire destroyed the warden's home, lighthouse, and infirmary in 1971. The power on the island was terminated. However, public support of the cause was still prevalent, but the last of the protesters were evacuated from the island when the U.S. Marshals raided on June 11th. Following the occupation, the government ended the policy of termination. Congress passed the Indian Financing Act of 1974, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act of 1975, and the Health Care Improvement Act of 1976. Then, the position of Assistant Secretary of the Interior replaced the position of Commissioner of Indian Affairs within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Despite the strong support for the occupation of Alcatraz, there was also opposition to the cause. Indian tribes from California complained that the urban Native Americans occupying the land do not have the right to claim it. They viewed their actions as ineffective and embarrassing to their culture. However, the occupation pushed Native Americans to start more initiatives and take over Fort Lawton near Seattle and Ellis Island on New York. The AIM used the Alcatraz publicity to launch occupations of other federal buildings. Following the events at Alcatraz, Dennis Banks proposed the idea of a 3,000-mile march from San Francisco, California to Washington, D.C., in response to multiple bills regarding Native rights. These bills would have severely limited the powers of tribal jurisdiction and cut off many Native American social services. The march would also raise awareness among non-Native Americans. On February 11, 1978, 2,000 marchers left San Francisco on foot, bound for the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. 26 demonstrators completed the entire distance, walking nearly 3,000 miles, traveling and camping in harsh conditions. Once they entered the capital city 5 months later, on July 15, 1978, the 2,000 marchers stopped at Meridian Hill, Malcolm X Park, and the Washington Monument. In the following days, protesters held demonstrations in front of the Supreme Court, started rallies, and camped out in federal parks. On July 25th, they had a massive rally at the Washington Monument to protest the bill before Congress and presented a Native American manifesto challenging the current structures and definitions shaping the treatment of Native Americans and outlining their rights and needs. 2 days later, California Representative Dalla Dellums read the statement into the congressional record in its entirety. By the end of July, all of the demonstrators had returned to their homes, and ultimately, Congress did not pass any of the 11 bills into law.
The Wounded Knee incident began on February 27, 1973, which lasted 71 days when approximately 200 Oglala Lakota and followers of the American Indian movement seized and occupied the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The activists chose the site of the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre for its symbolic value. The American Indian Movement members took 11 residents of the historic Oglala Sioux settlement hostage as local authorities and federal agents descended on the reservation until the government promised to look into them. Wounded Knee was one of the poorest communities and had the country's lowest rate of life expectancy. The day after, government forces and the American Indian Movement security exchanged gunfire throughout the occupation. Russell Means began negotiations for the release of the hostages, demanding that the U.S. Senate launch an investigation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and all Sioux reservations in South Dakota, and that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hold hearings on the scores of Indian treaties broken by the U.S. government. Violence continued on in the 1970s, and the casualties were 2 Sioux men that were shot to death by federal agents and several more were wounded. On May 8, 1973, the American Indian Movement leaders and their supporters surrendered after officials promised to investigate their complaints. Russell Means and Dennis Banks were arrested. But on September 16, 1973, the charges against them were dismissed by a federal judge because the witnesses and evidence were unlawful. The United States government regained control of Wounded Knee. Although officials promised to look into the injustices, nothing ever came out of their investigation.
As a direct result of the takeover of Alcatraz, the 1975 Indian Self-Determination Act and Education Assistance Act once again brought federal funding for Indian tribes and promised to lessen government controls. However, in the 1980s, many native tribes sued the government to gain independence on tribal reservation land. These cases paved the way for the creation of gambling operations on reservation land and provides a large income for those tribes. These are examples of how the American Indian movement made progress in more recent history. There are still many cases where Native Americans demand reparations be paid to tribes for the cruelty they witnessed from Americans. Even though the American Indian movement made progress, there are still ways to go for equality. Professional sports team naming a football team Redskins still resonates as offensive to many Native American people.
Hi, my name is Sophie Haneri, and I worked with Amelia Hines, Aiden Pine, and Matthew Ranga to make our children's storybook. We are in the 9th grade and have Mrs. Koulourudis as a teacher for our World History Honors class. I illustrated and presented the book, and Amelia helped me to present the book, and Aiden and Matt wrote the book. So in class we discussed imperialism and the effect that it had on numerous regions of the world. These regions included the 3 Muslim empires, which consisted of the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. For our project, we made a children's storybook that included an allegory, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. In this case, the allegory explains the effect of imperialism on the region that we researched. So the name of our book is The 3 Great Trees. Once upon a time, in a field far away, lived 3 old trees. The first tree was a great billowy willow that seemed to spread miles across the land. The second tree was a red maple that seemed to be as old as the world. The last tree was a beautiful cherry blossom tree. So each tree represents a different Muslim empire, and we describe these trees as old and beautiful because the Muslim empires were very prosperous and had lasted hundreds of years. Each morning when the sun rose from its hiding place beneath the horizon, the children would come out of their homes and the animals of the field and forest would come and rest beneath the shade of the 3 trees. The children and animals would never hurt the trees, but merely sit beneath the leaves or climb the strong branches. The children and animals represent the great European powers, and the sun rising represents the beginning of the age of imperialism. The children and animals did not hurt the trees in the beginning because in the beginning, Britain and France, which were 2 of the great European powers, helped the Ottoman Empire to resist Russian expansion. One day, the trees woke up to find its leaves in a pile on the ground. "We don't want to be a part of you anymore," said the leaves on the ground. "We want to be able to control ourselves and be able to walk around and lie down and climb like the children and the animals can." The leaves in the story are meant to represent the people in the 3 empires. During the age of imperialism, there were numerous nationalist revolts in each empire. So the leaves wanting to leave the trees symbolizes the tensions within the empires. One of the most extreme and impactful nationalist revolts was the Armenian Genocide. The Armenians were a Christian group concentrated in the eastern mountains of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans accused the Armenians of helping Russia, which was one of the great European powers. This led to their mass genocide. So this page goes on to symbolize the nationalist revolts within the empires. The trees were afraid. What would happen if all of our leaves fell off? How would I be able to survive without my leaves? When the children and animals saw the leaves on the ground, they scrambled to get some to play with. So the animals and children playing with the leaves represents the increased influence of major European powers in the Muslim empires. So the trees tried to be more like the children and the animals. For the first time in hundreds of years, they drew their brittle roots from the soil that had nourished them for so long. This page explains how the Muslim empires attempted to westernize. The Ottoman Empire increased their health care and agriculture. However, this caused even more unrest within the empire because it had greatly increased their population. This next page continues to explain the efforts made by the Muslim empires to westernize. However, then it goes on by saying that every day when the trees awoke from their slumber, they found more and more leaves on the ground for the children and animals to pick up. As the trees grew weaker, the children and animals took more leaves for themselves from the trees. So this represents the gradual downfall of the empires from their once great glory. One day, the children and animals noticed a delicious syrup flowing from a cut in the trunk in the maple tree. A lion and bear were resting beneath the tree when they tasted the amber juice and decided that they both wanted it all for themselves. "It's my syrup," said the bear. "No, it's my syrup," said the lion. "No, it's my syrup," cried the maple tree, but nobody heard him. So the lion and bear fought restlessly for the syrup. And by the time that the 2 animals had settled their argument, the maple tree was destroyed. It stood in its soil, bleeding sweet golden blood and crying sugary tears of syrup. Its once beautiful trunk was marked by the claws of the animals, and its once pure red leaves lay dead on the ground. These regions had raw materials that European powers needed. One of these raw materials was oil, which was abundant in Persia. The Safavid Empire was also known as the Persian Empire. In this story, the lion represents Britain and the bear represents Russia. The syrup represents the oil from the land. During this age of imperialism, the Great Game occurred. The Great Game consisted of a rivalry between Russia and Britain. These 2 great powers battled for influence in the area. This page expresses the worries of the empire and also says, "You can't walk," said the children and animals once again. "If you do, there will not be any trees for us to climb. on, or any fruit for us to eat, or shade for us to sit under. This illustrates how the European powers had exploited the Muslim empires for their raw materials. This page continues to describe that the European powers grew more and more selfish and demanded more and more from the Muslim empires by writing that the children and animals no longer cared about the trees. So the men and women and the animals of the forest gathered in the village, and when they returned to the field to greet the two trees left, they carried hatchets and axes, and at the end of the day there were no more trees for the men and women and animals to climb on, and when spring came, no more cherry blossoms bloomed from the buds of the cherry blossom tree. So by this point in the story, there's only two trees or empires left. And so in the end, the European powers had complete control of the Muslim empires, and the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal empires, they had all come to a complete collapse. So transforming our research on the Muslim empires into a storybook with pictures and an allegory helped us to better understand the region that we researched, because the information was told through symbolism, which made it very interesting because we were able to make a story have a deeper meaning as we told the story of the Muslim empires. Thank you.